I think one of the comments you make is you teach them some English one day, and the next day you'd have to teach them the same thing again.
Well, that had to do, and people are going to have different explanations for this. But if you're going to go teach in the Middle East, you're going to have to be aware of a social fact that the most of an Arab's life occurs after 5 o'clock, and where we go to work at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're in bed at 9. In the Arab culture, where it's so hot, traditionally they have slept in the day and done most of their business at night, and so that hasn't changed much. And because of things like the month of Ramadan, where people fast all day and then they party all night, eating food and visiting their relatives, it basically spills out into the rest of the year because it interrupts their sleep habits. So that's the problem right there, is that the sleep habits of the Arabs, because they're up all night doing something, when they're up during the day, they're basically just waiting to go take a nap. And when you're a university student and you don't have a job, you're not really responsible for things, and there's no immediate consequences for not doing homework. And you could say that here too, but there, that's what we were up against, is that not only were they not, they didn't understand the idea of what it was to be a student, but being able to remember things because you haven't slept. They just didn't understand that, and that's a big obstacle to teaching even now.
Okay, I'm going to completely switch gears and talk about one of my favorite subjects, food. I'm a great lover of food, and you made me laugh and made me salivate. Your idea of a camping meal was burgers and pasta, I believe. Am I correct on that?
Yes, and I believe the line I use in the book is, camp cooking is not necessarily good cooking.
Right. And I was thinking to myself, my goodness, you're going to travel halfway around the world and make nasty burgers on a campfire when, so many other delicacies are available. And indeed, you discovered one of my favorite cuisines, Indian. Isn't it just glorious?
Yes, and I have an interesting story that goes along with that. My first book is about, as we go through the book, I meet an Indian teacher from the capital of Muscat, and she's studying for her PhD and teaching at the medical college in the capital, and she introduces me to Indian food, and I initially scoffed at it, being an American, and I just make and you have to understand that I'm your stereotypical, almost incredibly so American, and I make the comment that when I was growing up, we were taught that people in India ate rice and bugs, and that's how they existed, so why would I want anything from India? But once I started sampling Indian food, I couldn't wait to get like the next dish to see what that was. So it completely turned me around, and as I make as I say in the book, I became I don't know if a lot of people would know what these dishes are, but I became a Malai kofta maniac and a paneeraholic. So.
And you also like dozas.
Oh, I love them, and this is the story. I'm glad you brought it up. My wife is from Delhi, and when I met her years years after this, and when I was still teaching in Oman. And when I married her, I said I really love Indian food, or when I met her, I said I love Indian food. So she said, oh, I can cook this, I can cook that. But the thing I love the most is dosa, is masala dosa. And I take udapam, and I put it on top of the dosa, and I put the sambar on top of everything, and the chutney. And I've had kids actually scream in restaurants when they see me eat this. But I love that. And after I get married, my wife says, well, you know what? I can't make masala dosa. So I kind of got stiff. She said that's a Southern Indian dish, and I'm a Northern Indiite.
Oh boy!
So, but I didn't trade her in. She's good for everything else.
No, I just love Indian cuisine, but there's not much of it to be found in Picayune, Mississippi. Like none.
Yeah. Try it going across state to Bobby Jindal's house. I'm sure you can find some good Indian food there. Isn't he still the governor of Louisiana?
So, anyway, back to the books. What I found fascinating was it wasn't a dry wit humor of teaching abroad. It was much more. The social life is far different from what we would find here in the U.S. You can't go to TGIFs and have a couple of beers and meet gals. Very different world. Did that come as a shock to you?
Yeah, when I actually went to Oman, my idea of where I was going was I actually thought I would be in a one room, hopefully with a window and a bed and a desk, and that was where I would do my work, and I was ready for that kind of environment. But when I got there, I found a place that was at least as lavish as the place I had left, if not more so. And I was put up in a 5-star hotel when I first arrived at the university where I was, supposed to work.
Okay, let's talk about universities. We have a theory about, or at least I have a theory about what a university is. Your students, though, don't come across as being English grade university students.
No, they were far from that, and we can go into the intricacies of their lack of an education system, I guess it would be, but I'll just make it very short and just say that you have to understand these guys the Sultan of Oman right now has been in power since the 1970s. His father did not allow any hospitals. He did not allow any schools to be built. Women were not to be educated. And there is a story there's a book called In His Majesty's Service by a guy in the British SAS that was actually involved in the fighting with Yemen back in the 1970s. And before this Sultan came into power, and this Sultan is very liberal, his father would not allow anything, including electricity, in towns. And the biggest expense he had was on his secret police. And so these kids were basically coming out of the Stone Age. And I'm really not kidding when I say that. They didn't have electricity when they were kids, and they talked about they wouldn't go out at night because kids would disappear, and they were really scared then. And now everything was good, and they think that the Sultan brought them everything. That he brought them the universities, the new houses, the new cars, everything. And when was that going to stop? And so they just understood that all they had to do was sit in the classes, get the sheepskin, and there was a job waiting for them at the end of the time they spent in the university. And so when we tried to convince them that no, that's not how it works, you have to actually pass your classes, there was a lot of problems with that. And then you started to see things like people would pass based on some maybe some money would get exchanged or something, but or a relative would use some influence, and it happened to me many times. I would get a call out of the blue from an uncle or a brother, or somebody would stop by my office to say, yeah, could you just go ahead and pass my cousin or nephew or whatever, and I would just say no, I'm not going to do that. And I for myself, because I come from the U.S. and we have very high, at least as far as I understood when I was doing the programs, we have very high teaching standards. And once you start, changing a person's grade because of some outside influence, well, you shouldn't be teaching. And so I refused to do it, and I just dumped that into the hands of the administration. But I know that it went on, and let me just say, yes, it's wrong to do that, but what happens if these kids don't stay in the college? Then they're out and they're unemployable, and what do they do then? So you really can't, and I really want to make sure people understand, and this is what my books are about. I'm really not trying to apply Western standards to the Middle East. I'm trying to explain to people how the Middle East works and how it works for people that go there like me, trying to adjust to the culture. And if you're going to go there, then if you read my books, you'll have a much easier time. But anyway, that's the answer to that is that these kids were just coming out of basically the Stone Age, and they didn't have any idea of what it was they were really supposed to be doing. And it was our job really, and my job especially. I felt very strong as an American, as the only American, that these kids have a good idea of what Americans are because they'd never seen one before. And so not only was I trying to be a good teacher, but I was also trying to be a good representative from a country that these kids were terrified of.
Let's move to more personal matters. The one thing that I spotted in both books was your quote, and I will put double quotes over it, emotional need. You had some bad experiences. Let's start with the Indian lady mentioned in book one. Your PhD.
Okay, well, let's just start off by calling me a glutton for punishment, as I do one stupid thing and take it even further and do an even stupider thing in the next book. So, in the first book, I have an Indian girlfriend who cannot ever, her family cannot ever find out that she's having a relationship with me, and to the point of, at least as far as she explained to me, that she could be killed. Her family would send her back to India and either kill her for honor or just marry her off immediately. And so we had to carry on this clandestine relationship, which we did for almost, I could say about 8 months, close to a year. And she lived in the capital of Muscat, and I was in a town 200 miles away. And so every weekend, I would drive, after I finished work, I would drive to Muscat, and we would have these great adventures, and we would travel all over the country, and we'd see these great places, and we'd do these great things, or we'd visit places in Muscat, and it was just ideal. It was just there was nothing that could ever compare to it. With the weather and the people and the background, there's nothing can compare to it. You couldn't make up a story like that would be that good. So we had this great relationship, but it was ultimately the culture, the Indian culture, especially the Hindu culture, that was the problem, and my background in the U.S. and being a Christian. So it was ultimately doomed to end, and as much as I didn't want it to, I lived in denial for a long time, but eventually it had to end.
Right, and in the second book, Another Year in Oman, it starts out amusing. You know, you are courting a New Zealand gal who makes it abundantly clear that you're not going to get in my knickers, and then you start a relationship which I have to admit, as I was reading it, I was going, well, he must have survived because he's written the book. But I thought it was very, very dangerous. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, it was completely dangerous on many levels, and I in the book I just want to point out that the events in the book happened, the places that they happened, and the people that are involved. I don't talk about specifically because these, by now this is at least 10 years after. I'm sure these. The people involved are older and married and have kids and families, and I don't want to ruin any lives or anything. And so I'll just say that the events in the book actually happened. The people and the places and where they live and all that, those have all been kind of moved around a little bit. But the loneliness is a very powerful tool, and it causes people to do crazy things. And considering the fact that the Iraq War had happened, and I had just been surrounded by a lot of lies. There were the lies coming out of what was happening in Iraq, what happened in the build up to Iraq, all of those lies, and the life that I had lived for the past year, and I just am a person who doesn't really understand why people don't tell the truth, because if you don't tell the truth, then what good is ever doing anything? And so based on, and the second book also, I tried to write it for the college kids that hopefully someday will be studying my books, and hopefully, I say hopefully, because I wanted to show that there was a darker side to my writing style, and that's what the second book is about. It's just intended to be a little bit darker than the first book, and it has a lot of introspection of somebody trying to cope with an environment that they really don't belong in.